Hi, my name is Christopher Hudson. I'm in African American 1010 class, and today I'll be talking about how racism in Maryland makes those in the new generation a part of history. I was born in Maryland, lived in Maryland my whole life. My community at the time, until I became around 13 or 14, was pretty small. It was mostly a mixed group of whites and blacks. Then later on, my dad became a pastor, and my community expanded to now only Prince George's County area, but the Baltimore area also. And this will affect my impact in how I view race and how I view my own identity. Growing up, I believe that racism wasn't something I would ever experience. Because of the fact that I grew up in a predominantly black place with very little whites, I believe that this was the world I lived in the world that would be there forever, basically. Until I went to Baltimore and I realized that that's not the case. While Baltimore is predominantly black, there are countless areas where white biased and white racial tension is very high, especially in Baltimore County, in downtown Baltimore. Racism, I grew to realize that racism is almost a rite of passage for the black community, and seeming is that everyone has to experience racism to fully get the black experience. Because of my experiences with racism, I grew to realize that racism is almost a rite of passage for the black community. And seeming is that everyone has to experience racism to fully get the black experience. Because of the numerous experiences I did gain through my life, I believe that those in the Maryland area are a part of history, whether they know it or not, because of the sheer amount of racial tension and racial protests that have involved in the community. So some facts about my community. Maryland is a southern state. So with that being said, Confederate flags are a major issue in rural parts. I didn't grow up in the areas where white people were predominantly Confederate, but traveling further south to my brother's birthplace, South Carolina, you'll see a lot of Confederate flags. With that being said, there is a lot of racial bias and racial tension, especially in Baltimore. Depending on where you, depending on how you perceive and how you're dressed, you're definitely looked at a different way. I remember there was a major issue with my hair because the way I've had my hair and the length I've had it, that it would create the connotation that I was a part of, you know, the wrong group or down to create trouble, which led to many law engagements that should not have been led to. Racism in America is always rising, but specifically in Maryland, racism reports have increased from 200 hate-based reports in 1 year to 400 in 2017. So between 2014 and 2017, there was a 200 more reports. That's a very big number. That's almost 200%. While 400 reports may seem like a low number, you have to understand that there is a large amount of unreported hate crimes that also may affect the statistics. Because of these unreported instances, the reports are misleading in some connotation, but it is a good way to gauge the amount of increase we had in racism. Another case that affects the reports is that most cases are dismissed because suspects can't be found, meaning they're either hidden or they're either viewed upon as not worth looking for. Not only are home communities affected by racism in Maryland, but also campuses. When I went to University of Maryland, there was a huge incident where black baby dolls were hung near the frat houses. This created a lot of racial tension, especially with among my community. We did not want to include ourselves with the white community at all. And then after that, there was a stabbing of a black kid down the street from my dorm, and this was considered a hate crime. So the amount of racism seen today is appalling. With these numbers and racism, education in this area is very hard to come by, and it's very hard to stay focused with the constant threat of racial tension, racial prejudice, especially amongst white teachers, which was also an issue with me. Also because being a large black male, many teachers would believe me to come off as overly aggressive, especially when grades or finals are concerned. Thus, security being called or them perceiving me as a danger to the class. When in reality, I was just calmly asking for information. While racism is a major issue, there's also worse areas, especially Baltimore, where plays a very key effect in many daily lives. Freddie Gray is a key example of how racism can affect the community and show off the inherent racism seen from the white community. I was involved in the Freddie Gray protests and the riots because of my church's location. The CVS building that burned down in Baltimore was down the street from my church. And so seeing that and seeing the looting and everything else played a key factor into the racism scene in that area. But one story I specifically remember is when we were protesting the Baltimore Oriole game. And during that, the whites in the area were very belligerent and aggressive, throwing racial slurs, calling us niggers, trying to get us to basically get under our skin to incite some sort of violence. While very minimum violence happened during that time, it just shows that racism is a major issue. It's just another key example. Being a young black male in this society is very hard, and it's even worse for young black women who have to not only go against the racial tension found there, but also against the misogyny found in current society also. But with all of this racism that's found, anyone that is in this area, I believe, is a part of history because of how we have to navigate the racist territories, and how we have to navigate the protests and various laws that affect the entire community.
For me, the Freddie Gray case was a turning point in my life. It was only the second time where I had seen blatant mistreatment of Black people by the police on television. The first time being the Trayvon Martin case, but I was of a much younger age at the time. So when my family and I watched the case on TV and watched the verdict play out, I didn't understand why my family was upset. I didn't understand why Black people all over the country were upset. I didn't understand the depth of the injustice that verdict was at the time. I didn't understand that it was a racially charged incident and Black people were mad because they thought that it was an injustice. I didn't understand much of that. I simply thought this man was found not guilty because the jury didn't think that he was guilty. I didn't understand exactly what was going on. When the Freddie Gray case came around, I was older. I was in high school. And so my eyes were open seeing the video of what happened to Freddie Gray and seeing the aftermath of the riots and all of that. That was really the first time that I saw and understood the treatment that Black people face from the justice system and from the police is not right. It is an injustice, and the Freddie Gray case was an injustice, and that was my first time really understanding that there is a problem going on, in our country, and people were mad about it. That was my first time fully understanding that, and that was also my first time seeing Black people revolt. I had heard about, revolutions and uprisings before, slave revolts and riots before, the LA riots after the Rodney King case, but this was my first time during my time not reading about this in a book or hearing about it from a teacher, seeing it with my own eyes play out on TV, how angry these people were. That was my first time experiencing that, and that really opened my eyes to the fact that this is not an issue that is over. It has been an issue for the entire duration of our country. And it's not something that has went away with time. It is something that has always been present and is still present and is still affecting Black people and Black men. And they are still being, faced with this racism and mistreatment from the police. And I fully grasped and understood that issue once the Freddie Gray case came. The Freddie Gray case also not only opened my eyes just to what was happening there, but to the future cases that came after that. All of the cases that came after that, I was aware of it. My eyes were definitely shut before the Freddie Gray case came. But once that came, I was seeing the mistreatments that were happening all over the place, and I was understanding, and I was reading about them, and I was feeling sympathy for the people that had been affected. And I was seeing my own family in their shoes, my own father, who is a Black man, who may be seen as threatening, my own brother, who is a Black man, and my own younger brother, who will grow into a Black man, but even as a child could be placed in these positions. That opened my eyes to the fact that this could happen to anybody, and it could happen to me. And the thought was scary and still is scary. So the Freddie Gray case was definitely a turning point for me.